my tax auditors. Don't worry about them. So,
Mark Anthony,
yes.
I've started recording. If you want to mention that at the beginning, we're recording this just so other people can see it at a later date if they'd like to. Trying to think of what else. I don't know if I'll turn my screen dark or stay visible, but
I have a question for the writers. Would you like to show what you will be reading on the screen?
Oh, like read along?
Yeah, I mean it's an optional. I'm just asking.
Yeah, I don't think I do.
Okay.
Well, I have the images, so
that'll be taking.
That'll take up that space. Yeah.
Kiik.
Yeah, I was going to do the same. Yeah, I have a PowerPoint.
Okay. All right. Sounds good.
So you guys have the ability to share your screen. Just announce, I'm going to share my screen now. That's really all you need to do.
I can't work.
I've never figured out how to do a background.
Yeah, that's great. It looks like I'm lost in another world.
Yeah.
So, oh well.
All right, we have 28 people in the waiting room. I can wait a couple more minutes. We had 79 registered as of this afternoon. So it's good.
Yeah, that is good.
Now we have 30, 31. So I think over the next minute or two more will join in. I think maybe at 5:02, I'll just tell you all I'm going to admit all, and then we're live, okay?
And you'll still admit people as they come in late.
I think after I hit admit all, people will just automatically be able to come in, but I'll keep an eye on it. And if people need to be admitted on a case-by-case basis, I'll just.
Great. I'm so excited to hear you all, by the way. I've been like looking forward to it all week.
To see you. I feel like I've talked to you so much.
All right.
Yeah, really looking forward to this. Thanks, you all.
Thank you. I have a question for the writers too. Like when you read online, do you have, well, I should have figured this out earlier, but do you have it on your computer screen so you can read from that, or just look down constantly?
Hey,
I have it printed out and I always look down. It's a little awkward, but I have kind of bad eyes, so I'm always like deep in it.
Mark Anthony, do you know what order you're going to go in?
Kiik, Caryl, and Susan.
Okay.
Should Kiik put his last name up just for audience identification?
You can change. Yeah, Kiik, go ahead and change your display name if you want. Okay, we have
unless your last name is he, him, so I don't want to insult you.
We have 42 waiting. If you guys are ready, I'm going to go ahead and admit all. Mark Anthony, are you ready to go? Because you'll be the first voice right here.
I will. I am ready to go.
Okay, 44. Here we go. If you need me for anything, send me a chat to host.
Okay.
And I'll try to help you.
I'll probably all type help. Okay.
Okay, ready?
All right.
Yep.
Good luck. Have fun.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. Oh, wow. Wow. This is beautiful. Well, these gorgeous faces of God. Hello, everyone. Hello. Thank you for joining us on this Hallows Eve. I am Mark Anthony Richardson, and I'm the host for the FC2 virtual reading series. We will be celebrating 3 writers who are just outstanding. And they currently have 3 books out for, each have a book out from FC2. And I'm just excited to really be here with them because they're great. I've been reading their books, and all their voices are so inimitable and capable of being imitated. And I hope you all will find a pleasure in reading these books yourselves. I want to say a few words about Fiction Collective.
Oh, Mark, I think you're muted.
Okay, can everyone hear me now?
Yes.
All right, well, my apologies. First time. Let me start over again. My name is Mark Anthony Richardson. I'm an author with FC2. I am currently hosting the FC2 virtual reading series, and I'm just really excited to celebrate these three authors today because their works are truly inimitable, incapable of being imitated, and I hope you all get a chance to find out for yourselves because they're just up and coming. And I want to say a few words about Fiction Collective too, because they're truly the experimental writer haven. I mean, without FC2, someone who will be able to publish me or publish anything I'm crazy enough to write and keep it in print. That's the second part is really important. So FC2, a hub for artistically adventurous, non-traditional fiction, is a not-for-profit publisher run by authors. Since its origin in 1974, membership of the collective has grown from 6 founding author members to over 100 today. FC2 has published more than 200 books and continues to publish 6 new books every year, 3 in fall and 3 in spring. FC2 is committed to finding fresh and experimental works, both through member-sponsored submissions and through 2 annual competitions: the Ronald Sukenick Innovative Fiction Contest and the Catherine Doctorow Innovative Fiction Prize. The deadline for both competitions, by the way, are November 1st, so you don't have that much time. Vote, and well, you have to send this out before you vote, and voting's afterwards. So FC2 receives financial support from the Jarvis and Candace Doctorow Family Foundation, so we're greatly appreciative to them. Okay, writers, are we ready? Guess we can all unmute. Our first writer today is Kiik Araki-Kawaguchi, who writes dream pop speculative fiction that can be enjoyed on a bus ride or in a line for coffee. If you don't drink coffee like me, tea. All his best stories have been something to do with talking insects. He is the author of Disintegration Made Plain and Easy. In The Book of Cain of Margaret, winner of the FC2 Ronald Sukenick Innovative Fiction Prize, is about 2 teenage lovers, Kiik Araki and Margaret Mori, who disrupt a World War II Japanese internment camp in Arizona. Kiik Araki is also the name of a man who, mysteriously, sprouts a pair of raven's wings, and Margaret Mori is the name of an aging healer who treats embarrassing conditions, smelly feet, and excessive flatulence, and the name of a girl who communes with the devil, trading human teeth for divine wishes. Publishers Weekly calls it inventive and surreal, a beautifully rendered reflection on a dark moment of American history. Blessings, Kiik. You're mute. There you go.
Thank you for that.
No problem. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us.
I'm going to take us to a share, but Mark, you can shout at me if anything goes awry with the PowerPoint.
Okay. I have a question for you. Yeah, I want to ask you a question real quick before you start. Your novel, The Book of Cain and Margaret, it not only mixes historical fiction and fact, but realism and magical realism. And I'm just really curious to know what inspired this work for you.
That's a good question. Well, a lot of it was inspired by my grandparents' story. Yeah, I'll say a bit about it in the intro, but yeah, it was written after taking their oral narratives for a long time, 10, 15 years. And I'm thinking about how I would try to write it just like a historical fiction and realize like I just wasn't the right kind of writer to do that.
Right.
And so I was writing a lot of weird things, you know, I was writing a lot about talking insects and, sci-fi things, spacecrafts and things like that. And so I just did a test to see if those things could be blended. And I was just persistent. I think maybe I wrote it this way because I couldn't have written it another way, but that's kind of how it started, a combination of taking their oral narratives and trying to figure out a way to render them to the written form, and then just being kind of obsessed with like X-Men fan fiction, and so that's kind of how it happened.
Wow, thank you so much. What will you be reading?
I'm going to read from the Book of Cain and Margaret. And I just, let's see, well, I'll say hi to everyone. I was going to say thank you to everyone who's joining us today. Thank you for lending us your ears, your kindness. I was going to say thank you to University of Alabama Press and FC2 for their support. Thank you to Mark for coordinating and for emceeing. And I'm honored to be opening for such esteemed writers, Caryl and Susan. And I'm going to try to just be very on time today, as I'm also just so excited to hear some of their incredible and innovative work out loud. And so I just need to make sure I can, there we go. So I'm going to be reading from the Book of Cain and Margaret. I'll try to set the historical scene a little bit for the two selections I'm going to read from. These are Yellow Peril cartoons. These were pervasive in America in the early 1900s, and European Americans had a lot of anxiety about East Asians conquering and subjugating the Western world. So you have a lot of this like anti-Asian racism and xenophobia sort of fomenting for years against immigrants coming from all over East and Southeast Asia by the late 1800s and early 1900s. And then there's this sort of tradition of making anti-Asian racism and xenophobia into law. So you have the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882. This prohibits Chinese laborers from coming to America, certainly being naturalized. And then there's a number of alien land laws that prohibit immigrants from owning land or agricultural land. And so this included folks from China, Korea, India, and Japan. And so there's a lot of this sort of racially motivated fear and discrimination kind of in the air that's building for a long time. This is a cartoon by Dr. Seuss.
Oh my God.
And then,
wow.
And then you have this attack, the attack on Pearl Harbor, 1941 by the Japanese military. This serves as a really good justification to incarcerate Japanese Americans based on a military need. And leads to this. This is Executive Order 9066, authorizes the Secretary of War to clear military zones of enemy aliens. So in this case, enemy aliens, anyone of Japanese descent, military zones being Washington, Oregon, California, basically the West Coast. And Japanese Americans told to pack a bag. Usually folks brought whatever they could carry. And I'll read a little bit about what Cain brought.
You have 15 minutes, so don't rush.
Okay. When it came time for Kiik Araki to pack his suitcase for Gila River, he knew he could not survive the desert without his 8 pairs of cowboy boots. For them to fit, he crammed one boot into another. Then those boots he packed into another, like Russian nesting dolls. Finally, he was left with a single densely packed shaft of cowhide and lizard skin he wedged into a crook at the base of his case. Cain also felt his mother would be lost without her shell walkway. 3 years prior, embers from a brush fire had floated up and purchased most of Yoko Araki's vision. In response, Cain walked into the ocean, took a mighty breath, and dove through a thicket of kelp toward the deep water crevices. When he emerged, he hauled with him 30 massive red abalone. On Yoko's porch, he shattered the shells, and laid down an iridescent walkway for her to follow. Before leaving for Gila River, Kiik pried every shell fragment from the ground, stacked them like dinnerware, folded them into a sheet, and lodged them in his suitcase. Kiik owned 17 birds and a horse. For his birds, he lined a picnic basket with a tablecloth and placed them in it side by side. He gave them a tin of water and a tin of strawberry jam. Then he anchored the basket into the center of his toiletries, his hairbrush, bottled aftershave, toothpaste, squeezing the basket at every side so it could not move during travel. Finally, his horse he made step down into his suitcase, where he'd made a bed of his shirts and long underwear. He combed away the mosquitoes from her back and hips and held a punch bowl of ice water before her to drink, then fastened her halter to a wood crate of contraband whiskey. Behind the Araki tool shed, a miraculous patch of wild strawberries burst the soil every year. Their arrival became a minor celebration with the Arakis, who chopped the berries at an outdoor table and tossed them with bowls of milk and brown sugar. And though the Arakis could never help but ravage the plants, though they never saved seed nor runners, the massive berries managed to reappear. Kiik was cautious not to damage the root structures of the plants as he dug them from the ground and placed them in paper sacks, anchoring them with aerated soil and loose gravel. He understood the plants could only survive under the cool Pacific fog. With a funnel, he sucked lungfuls of mist at the edge of Guadalupe Beach. Then he exhaled them into the paper sacks before winding them down the tops of them. That plot of 50 or 60 plants was the last possession he folded into his suitcase. Kiik wound his belt around one end of the suitcase and several feet of rope at the other, so that with a sudden bump, it could not spring open and release birds into the train cabin. Let's see, so my family mostly went here. This was the Japanese internment camp in Gila, Arizona. There were camps all over Colorado, Wyoming, Utah, Arkansas. There's about 120,000 folks being relocated altogether. And I should say, so the novel is based on the oral narratives of my grandparents, their experiences. They met here, fell in love, they got married here, had their first daughter here. But I would just say that my novel is a very, very loose rendering of their stories because it's sort of more parts speculative fiction than historical fiction. Right. And so the way I tend to think about this book is you'll sort of see the Gila River camp, but it's sort of Gila River one world over. So the world of my novel shares a lot of things with this world, names, dates, locations, but there are a lot of departures too. So there are crickets that can inhabit dreams and aircraft lifted by thousands of desert birds and men who can pack a horse and a strawberry field into a single suitcase. And these were some of the illustrations created for the book by this really great visual artist, Gautam Rangan. And I'll share a little bit more. An ethnic studies professor, Wing Yang at UCSD, was teaching some chapters of my work. And this is some student work that was based on those chapters. They did some really beautiful illustrations. So I have this chapter, Mark mentioned it, where someone sprouts wings, they can fly in and out of camp. I have a chapter where there's a man just a few inches tall, and a chapter where there's a young girl who has like a magical wasp who will eat a person's lies. So she keeps it like perched over her ear. And anyhow, it's just to say I write a lot of weird things. Something my grandparents had talked about was the food they missed being in camp. And a lot of things were rationed during the war anyhow, so meat and sugar. And they later developed vegetable gardens, but there weren't a lot of fresh foods at first. And a lot of things were made from powders, and like all the milk was powdered, and a lot of the fruit came from a can. So it's kind of described as like cafeteria, only cooked out of the canned and baking aisle, I guess. And that sets the scene for this chapter. This is about a girl who has a pet cricket, and the cricket is sort of like on a hunger strike. And she cooks everything she can think of to get her cricket to eat. But the cricket has a craving for something else.
I really like the mixture of like, it's kind of fable-esque. And I don't know if you ever read Bruno Schultz. It reminds me.
The crocodile? Yeah.
Yeah, The Street of Crocodiles, how your book can make the mundane extraordinary.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll just read a little bit of this and then this will be my last part. Though her arms became branded by inadvertent flames of hot grease and steam, though her olfactory nerves grew tired and raw, though her eyes clouded from lack of sleep, Margaret continued to dribble hot oil onto chicken skin until it curled into a sail of sweetened fat. Margaret steamed custards of tofu, ponzu, green onion, and whipped eggs in teacups. Her hands clapped pots of white rice into steaming wedges and garnished their peaks with tart strips of shoga. And if her rice balls were finished before the sun had risen, she transferred them to an open fire, toasted them, and lowered them into a ceramic bowl and splashed them over with a broth made from kombu and flakes of bonito dashi. Still, Margaret Morey's cricket would not eat. You must eat, she insisted. But her cricket merely balked his wings at her, pronounced a fierce staccato snort. If you will not eat what I cook for you, then what will you eat, she asked. And her cricket said, there is just one thing I can eat. Yes, anything, Margaret pleaded. I will make whatever you wish. Her cricket said, when you lie down to sleep tonight, place me beside your left ear. We will find each other in your dreams, and I will be able to find a meal there. That night, when Margaret went down upon her bedroll, she did as her cricket had instructed. She placed her cricket in a little nest of hair beside her left ear and was quickly overtaken by the blackness of sleep. During the first months inside the fences of the Gila Relocation Center, Margaret's dreams would transport her back to her family's home in Venice, California. But in the past 2 years, all Margaret's dreams had been pulled as though by a tether back to Gila. And on that occasion, when she came into awareness, she found herself sitting in the darkness of the Morey family barracks. Then she saw her cricket had assumed the form of a man. She was positive this man was her cricket because his voice had grown louder, but had not altered. He was vaguely humming a song and cleaning his teeth with a wooden splinter. As a man, her cricket was slightly reminiscent of the local minister from the Venice Methodist Church, the Reverend June Shozaburo. He was lean and immaculate, clothing unblemished, hair and fingers well manicured, and something of his smile seemed slightly misaligned, as though his mouth was overly crowded with teeth. Now that you are here, I will cook any food you desire, Margaret told him. We aren't bound to what I can steal from the canteen and the mess hall anymore. I can find you the most expensive, most marbled cuts of meat, matsutake mushrooms, magnificent quail eggs, or perhaps you are thirsty. Here you can drink a dozen foaming beers. Her cricket man said, I have not come here to eat anything you can cook. The only thing I will eat is your mother. My mother, Margaret exclaimed. Do not be frightened, Margaret, her cricket man said. No harm will come to your actual mother. I only want to eat the mother of this world, the mother of this dream. That is all I want. But my mother, I do not think I could allow it, even if it is only a dream. Margaret, since pledging myself to you, there has only been starvation. Many times I thought surely today will be the morning I die from hunger. But I always reserved faith that one day you would find a way to feed me the thing I needed. Margaret began to wonder if she was behaving ridiculously. She looked down at her dream mother. Who was this woman actually? What was this woman but a wisp of imagination? What was the value of this shadow passing through the darkness of her nights? Well, I suppose if I don't have to watch, it could be all right, Margaret said. I suppose she doesn't have actual feelings. She isn't my flesh and blood mother after all. I knew you would be the one to save me, her cricket man said. I knew I could count on you to understand. Then he scooped Margaret's dream mother up in a blanket and carried her behind one of the barracks partitions. Margaret could hear the two of them struggling. She had the urge to go to them to mediate the horror of this attack in some way, but her legs felt stricken with paralysis. Margaret, she could hear her mother screaming, I can't get him off of me. Stop him. The next morning, eating breakfast shoulder to shoulder with the members of her family, Margaret felt tormented with guilt. She feigned sickness and went back to their barracks to lie down. It went on in this way for weeks. Every evening, Margaret would place her cricket beside her left ear, and every night her cricket would transform into a man and ask to devour another member of the Morey family. On the morning that followed, Margaret would be overtaken by guilt and avoid meals, chores, and conversation. It wasn't only guilt and exhaustion that worried her. Margaret was having additional troubles during her waking hours. She found she sometimes had difficulty recalling the names of her cousins and siblings. She found herself having to relearn their habits, sensitivities, alliances, when they preferred to rise and sleep, which jokes might hurt them and which might make them laugh, which friends they loved or despised in secret. On her worst days, she had difficulty recognizing her family, as though their faces, gestures, voices had metamorphosed into something foreign during the night. As this became a regular occurrence, Margaret felt compelled to confront her cricket. Count all the members of your family, the cricket told her, and strike me dead if even one of them is missing from Gila River. Of course they haven't gone, Margaret said, but it's not the point. I'm having trouble remembering them. Yesterday I tried to call out to Tetsuo, but I'd forgotten what to call him. I'd forgotten my own brother's name. Thank you. So I'll stop.
All right. Thank you. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Ashe. Wow, kind of brings me back to childhood where I was stuck in a room all the time, making up things. Thank you, Kiik. Our second writer is Caryl Pagel. She is associate professor at Cleveland State University, where she teaches poetry and nonfiction in the Neo-MFA program. She is author of 2 collections of poetry, Twice Told, Experiments I Should Like Tried at My Own Death. She is co-founder and editor at Rescue Press and director of the Cleveland State University Poetry Center. Out of Nowhere into Nothing is a book of essays on apparitional and incomprehensible. Let me start over. Out of Nowhere into Nothing is a book of essays on the apparitional, the incomprehensible, and the paranormal in conversation with art, travel, and storytelling. Interspersed with documentary-style photographs, Pagel's first collection of prose is a radiant, obsessive investigation into the mysteries at the center of our seemingly mundane lives. Sarah Ora Mark, author of Wild Milk, says, Out of Nowhere into Nothing is a radical retelling of loneliness. With the ribbon-like precision of Woolf and Sebald, Pagel writes like a ghost in the company of ghosts. Each essay reads not like a honeycomb, but like a ghost comb, a mass of hexagonal cells that contains the uncontainable, inside jokes, hallucinations, grief, love, art, nothingness, and the swell of being. Blessings, Caryl.
Hello.
Hello. How are you?
I'm good. So
I have your book is,
yeah.
As I just read in the introduction, it reminds me of The Rings of Saturn by Sebald, as well as The Immigrants and Vertigo. And I wanted, but it's uniquely yours. And I also, I'll ask all the writers, I'm always curious to know about what inspired it. I've never been to Chicago, but it felt like I've been in Chicago right now after reading that book.
What inspired the book?
Yes.
Or okay. I think something different probably inspired each of the essays. They kind of range from everything from like a long walk in Chicago to what I'm about to read from, which is kind of a story about Cleveland, where I live. One of the essays is about the football coach at my high school. There's a lot of art, there's a lot of travel. I would say that traveling was a big part of the inspiration. Almost all of the essays were written not at home, when I was going from one place to another, whether it was like my mom's house or there's an essay about Spiral Jetty in Utah. So
you were writing them pretty much on the road. Yeah,
almost always.
Wow. It kind of comes through that way too.
Yeah, they feel very much in motion to me.
Yeah. Wow. What will you be reading for us today?
So I'm going to read kind of the last half of an essay that's called What Remains to Be Seen. And it's about 3/4 of the way through the book. And I have some images I'm going to show along with it. A couple of the images are in the book, but most of them aren't. And before I start, I'm actually going to really quickly drop the image credits into the chat in case anyone's curious. And then I just wanted to thank you, Mark and Kiik and Susan, for reading with me. This is really lovely. And to thank everyone at FC2 and the University of Alabama Press. Have the book right here, and it's just, I'm so happy with it. I think it looks really beautiful.
Beautiful. I love that cover.
Yeah, and I just wanted to thank everyone who was a part of making it, and to all of you for being here. So I'm going to share my screen and then get started. What remains to be seen. One morning after I finally arrived on O's Island, which included swarms of biology students, environmental photographers, marine faculty, bird banders, gull-speckled staff housing, and a famous 19th century poet's elegantly replicated garden, I walked over to the rust-colored concrete observation tower and watched as O and his colleagues put together what looked like a giant steel torpedo intended to drag an underwater net in such a way that the island's interns could collect samples of sea scum. As I wandered through the adjacent laboratory, peering at decades-old aquatic skeletons and sea fetuses floating in oily preservative, I spotted, taped to the sun-worn lab door, a single sheet of loose leaf that announced the following evening's lecture, Plastics and the Anthropocene, reminding me of the most recent issue of National Geographic, which featured a dozen striking photographs of ocean animals encumbered by plastic. The most adorable of these unsettling shots was a small amber seahorse dragging a pastel pink Q-tip along the bottom of the turquoise sea with its curly Q tail. Another photo showed a pack of Ethiopian hyenas nosing through piles of trash, and a third caught an Australian sponge crab wearing a transparent cape of plastic instead of its rightful opaque shell, which would have protected it from predators. Even the deepest floors of the ocean had been tainted by toxic debris, grocery bags, pill bottles, straws, coffee holders, microbeads, tarps, tape, car parts, bottle caps, jacket fibers, carry-out containers, shoes, ghost nets, children's toys, mattress stuffing, lost balloons, cutlery, shampoo bottles, pylons, oil jugs, and so forth. Soap was turning up in the stomachs of turtles, lead circulated in the bloodstreams of Midwestern children, opioids were detected in Puget Sound's mussels, and evidence of Fukushima's nuclear signature could be found in California wines. For years, biologists had been studying tern populations on the tiny island next to O's, he told me. And each summer, 3 scientists protected the breeding populations from predators by living as unobtrusively as possible among thousands of birds in a small cabin with solar electricity, a guard dog, and no running water. There were common, roseate, and Arctic terns on the island, many of which would travel more than 40,000 miles for the winter, migrating along the east coast to South America, taking about a month to commute in the fall and just 2 weeks for their trip back to Maine. For 2 decades, they had returned to this island, where the biologists monitored the birds' health, studied patterns in mating and flight, and more recently tracked the plastic the terns were ingesting. One of their concerns beyond this new evidence of pollution was the phenomenon of dread flight, which is when an entire colony, suddenly scared of a predator, grows absolutely silent, abruptly ascending en masse, never to return again. Even in the ornithological world, it seemed, the power of a single arbitrary bully could spook an entire population, changing the course of history for generations. But here is the point. Before the summer started, before the trip out east, before I settled into a new year, a new overpriced parking pass, book edits, lunchtime peanut butter sandwiches, trash days, snow shoveling, and utility bills, before a myriad of personal diversions and the daily drive through the strange and mostly vacant strip of land between uptown and downtown Cleveland, with its public service billboards, tall weeds, hospital construction, and old Dennis Kucinich signs. I encountered a video about the city in which I lived that would stay with me for years, and in time come to summarize my feelings about the place more clearly than any personal insight. The video was called Balloon Fest and took place during 2 days in 1986. It was made by a cinematographer named Nathan Truesdell and was a 6.5-minute collage of 30-year-old footage gathered from the Northeast Ohio Broadcast Archives, WJW Cleveland, and resident home videos. It begins with a broom-mustached newscaster excitedly interviewing Los Angeles-based balloon artist Treb Heening with a thin silver microphone in sunny downtown Cleveland. After Heening predicts that a child can fill 2 to 3 balloons a minute, the viewers are returned to the studio, where an energetic blonde and her partner report on a live feed showing, in the warm, washed-out tones of 80s TV lens colors, citizens milling about in large sunglasses, striped polos, big jeans, crop tops, and the subtlest of bell-bottoms. The city of Cleveland was attempting to break the world record for a simultaneous balloon launch, sending more than 1.5 million balloons into the ether in one release to beat the previous record held by Disneyland. Footage shows thousands of citizens gathered in a historically dead downtown to pump plastic pockets full of gas and gently float the orbs into a 3-story high mesh fishing net, which caught the bits of latex flyers in a single spot so they could be released into the skies altogether. In the video, commentators are nearly hysterical with praise for this celebratory image of change, boosting a city that for as long as anyone can remember has been associated with an almost spiritual losing streak. In one clip, Big Chuck, a local radio personality, interviews a distraught middle-aged woman named Marianne about her wristwatch, which she had tied to some balloons when the clasp popped open and the watch sailed away. The cameraman focuses on children with sore speckled gauze-taped fingers earned from too much inflating. A Los Angeles spokesman for the event claims that he and his wife have, quote, been in the city for 6 months and have even considered moving to Cleveland despite their friends thinking they're crazy. The countdown begins, and as thousands of balloons are finally released into the air, an announcer cries, "We did it! There's no mistake on the lake anymore." The balloons rise and swirl higher than the city's skyscrapers, creating almost aquatic eddies and organic flowing flight patterns reminiscent of a murmur of birds or school of minnows. What comes next is sadly unsurprising. A storm stumbles over the horizon and the cold front immediately sinks whole swaths of the just freed swarm. They blow every which way and then dip and land. It's instant chaos. The balloons become little bits of garbage docking in the wrong spots. Thousands of plastic pieces drift into already toxic Lake Erie, and others travel in packs to Canada. The viewer learns that the ancient curse of Cleveland is still working, that the city didn't break the world record after all, and that the balloons, instead of cementing transformation, became swift harbingers of doom, spelling danger for sailors navigating the messy party favor of a lake. The following morning, the Coast Guard was dispatched to search for 2 missing men, who had gone overboard the previous night in their fishing boat. On film, the environmental impact is never mentioned. I watched the video several times, returning not only for the humor of a stunt gone wrong, but also for the splendor of the still shots. One clip shows hundreds of balloons drifting on the lake like confetti, reminding me not only of Yayoi Kusama's immersive kaleidoscopic infinity mirrors, but also of Howardina Pindel's polka dots in their speckled excellence. Perhaps the most startling visual moment in the documentary was when the balloons, just liberated from their net, slowly rose and congealed into one tail-like gaseous swirling figure, mirroring the tufts of nearby smokestacks. The colors of the balloons in this shot blended not, as one would guess, to brown or black, but instead to a striking rust against the clear sky, curling up and around Terminal Tower like fire, an orange omen of what would later become my generation's greatest nightmare. But no, that was impossible. No one in 1986 would imagine that planes would fly into skyscrapers, that buildings could buckle. It was not yet easy to believe that the end of the world, the end of memory, was upon us. What can we save, I wondered, and what's left to the wind? That which is intended for Cleveland can end up in Canada. That which keeps time might upsent into autumn sky. The smiles on the faces in the film had a bit more time, but not a ton. They burned bright in a pathetic and flammable city submerged in the trash of its own sad party. Let go, one might think, of any other kind of future. Let go, let go, let go.
It's like it's like a time capsule, if a time capsule could speak.
Thank you. That's a
yeah,
lovely compliment.
It's very, very, very lulling, very lulling. I found myself felt like I was disintegrating. And becoming part of the voice for a little while. Thank you for reading that. That was so
Thank
beautiful.
you.
It's kind of a theme so far that I've been noticing with the history and the mundane, and I just wanted to just thank you for doing it. I wanted to always write about Philadelphia that way, you know, like a sort of a map of the soul. And that's what your book kind of read, like a map of the soul. And I'm not going to buy disposable lighters anymore. Got some from CVS the other day, and it was cheap, but I said, wow, seeing that picture, I was like, yeah, let me get a Zippo. But thank you so much, Caryl. Thank you so much. Our last reader tonight is Miss Susan Neville. Hi, Susan.
Hi.
She is a professor of creative writing and a Dima Butler Chair in English at Butler University. She is the winner of the Flannery O'Connor Award in Short Fiction for Invention of Flight, and the winner of the Richard Sullivan Prize in Short Fiction for In the House of Blue Lights. The Town of Whispering Dolls. I'm going to steal that title. Winner of the FC2 Catherine Doctoral Innovative Fiction Prize, is a collection of stories haunted by the remains of the industrial Midwest, the opioid epidemic, and the technology of war. Located somewhere in the Rust Belt in the early 21st century, residents of the town of Whispering Dolls dream of a fabled and illusory past. Even as new technology reshaped their world into something different and deeply strange. Dolls walk down the streets, cradling their empty heads and letting the wind turn them into flues. Joan Silber, author of Improvement, says, Neville has an imagination that's not only rich and strange, but also a very much a moral imagination. Gentle and shocking in her view of what humans have done. Blessings, Susans, or hello. I forget that people don't know how to respond to blessings.
Yeah, blessings to you.
But we should bless each other more.
We should just bless one another all the time, I think.
We're divine, so why not?
Yeah.
So, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you to FC2. And I'm so grateful to the Dr. O Foundation. And I love the way this book looks. Unfortunately, I don't have here it is. I don't have a PowerPoint or anything, but I'm really excited about it. The place, I'll talk about the idea for the book, I guess, just for a second. About 6 years ago, Austin, Indiana, which is a small town of about 4,000 people, 80 miles south of Indianapolis, started seeing an outbreak of HIV that eventually grew to 235 cases, which at the time exceeded the number of people with HIV cases tied to injection drug use in any other city or state in the previous year. And it came as a shock and surprise. Part of the problem was that free HIV testing hadn't been available in the county since Planned Parenthood, because of the loss of federal and state funding, closed the only clinic that offered the tests. And when it became clear that there was a real epidemic in Austin tied to the opioid epidemic, which is still ongoing and still quite awful in the Midwest, the CDC asked Indiana, I live in Indianapolis, to remove its ban on needle exchanges. And our then governor, Pence, refused to refused to allow needle exchanges. So the outbreak continued until he finally signed an emergency bill. One, he said he didn't enter lightly. I'm sorry to make this
What year was this, by the way?
This was in 2014.
2014. Okay.
Yeah. And Pence was quoted as saying, "I don't believe effective anti-drug policy involves handing out drug paraphernalia." The number of HIV cases grew smaller from 157 1 year to 7 2 years later once they started the needle exchange program. So people in Austin, there are interviews with people who said, that they looked out the windows and suddenly the young women were prostituting themselves to get drugs. And the town had just changed completely. So I'm going to read, I guess I'm going to read this. I've been going back and forth between this.
I like the history. I like the background, so I can put
and not so disturbing things. So I'll just maybe read
important,
the middle of the disturbing thing. But yeah, the background stuff was very important. So many of the stories in here are about the people kind of becoming dolls, basically turning to kind of plastic and losing losing part of their soul. And so I'm so sorry I'm dabbling here because I just decided I really can't read the disturbing one.
Well, why not?
Because I would be disturbed. Well, I'll read it. It's called Kiik, and it is
books don't depress me. People depress me.
This is the point of view of a woman. She talks about herself in the third person. She has lost one son to an overdose, and she's afraid that she's going to be losing her daughter to an overdose as well. So anyway, this is called Game Night, and it's a trigger warning, and I hope it's not too disturbing. It's in sections. The first section is called Needles. There's the needle you stick in the deflated basketball before attaching the air pump. The needles on the white pine that fall one day in autumn and turn red on the ground. There's the different thickness of needles in a sewing kit. There are wood and plastic knitting needles and metal knitting needles the color of popcorn bowls and metal cups. like the blues and greens of bicycles with their black and white tires and the needles you use to inflate the tires. And there's the particular thin needle your mother used to stitch the sleeve of your brother's best suit before he was laid in the casket. And there's the needle the undertaker used to sew his lips shut. There are needles you set in the groove on vinyl records to release the sound. There are needles that measure the sound, and acupuncture needles and trussing needles for tying the legs of poultry before it's cooked. And then there are the slim silver needles, fine as broom straw, that pierce human skin and flesh, and the elastic tubes that carry blood toward the heart. You will need several of the latter, or you can share one with your neighbors. Do not make this second choice. Syringe. In some states, you can find them at the drugstore. In other states, you can't. Don't look for any logic or consistency. Don't look for kindness. The gamekeepers want to think the worst of you. You know that. In the states where you can't buy syringes easily, you may run into trouble. It will not stop your play, but the play will be more dangerous. In those states, the game is more like gambling. Oddly enough, gambling itself is often legal in those states. As you know, our state is one of them. I'm so very sorry for this because it means, unfortunately, that you will quickly join the dark side of the game. My dear one, the risks will be greater for you. It can't be helped. To put all the risks out on the table, know too that this is a place where you cannot exchange your needles at the end of play, even if the milky drip of liquid and blood is still clinging to the tip of the one your roommate hands you. It seems to be the thinking that the needle itself is what drew you to the game. And while it is true that sometimes just the sight of the needle or the prick of any needle will give you a fleeting temporary relief, it is not enough. So you will make your own arrangements. God save you as you roll the dice. So when you cannot find needles easily, find a relative or neighbor who is diabetic. If the neighbor is elderly, he or she will think the syringe has been misplaced and will soon purchase others if the pharmacist will allow it. Pharmacists are drunk with power, and it may be difficult for the diabetic who pleads and whimpers. But don't think about that. Protect yourself. If you still have a credit card, dear one, order your kit from eBay or go to a fisherman, as they have their own sources for rigs that they use to inject air beneath the skin of earthworms so the bait does not join the algae muck at the bottom of a river or lake. This is true. Buy some wading boots and a pole, or steal them from Gander Mountain. Listen to the recordings of birds. Peruse assault rifles like a good citizen. Move to fishing supplies. Fishermen are seldom questioned about their rigs. Diabetics, on the other hand, are sometimes treated like criminals. And one more risk. If you are caught with any of this, you will end up in jail, where even if you're not sentenced, you might wait a year or two for a defense attorney to plead your case. Ultimately, this may be for the best, but you will never, ever get a job should they appear again. This is all part of the game. It is as it is currently played in the heart of the country. Dear one, a note on water and spoons. Do not be afraid to ask questions of your friends or family. Some compounds dissolve easy in room temperature water. Some dissolve only when heated. Heat is your friend, as boiling water may kill viruses. It is recommended that you boil all the water to begin with. Please do not become impatient and use cold, dirty water, or forget to bring the boiling water back down to room temperature. I regret that I must say these things that might seem obvious, but I must. When you were a baby, I was given a ceramic handled spoon at a baby shower, and I fed your dear brother strained peaches and strained peas and used the soft side of the spoon to carefully make a second bite out of the food that oozed from the corners of his sweet, sweet mouth. As you grew, you followed him everywhere. How to play. So you found a syringe and a short needle, ultrafine if you can get it. Thick needles will work, but make a popping sound that may frighten you. You've dissolved the compound and filled your kit. If you can, find someone to do this with you, as games are not meant to be played alone. Find several someones. Practice how you will call the hospital should one of you require it. Practice hiding your kit so you will not go to jail. Think of this as military training. You do not, under any circumstances, abandon your buddy. You would never jump into the stone quarry with no one with you. You might break your neck or drown unremarked upon. Tap into that old knowledge, and don't worry. If you live in certain areas of this county, players will be plentiful. Just look around you and someone will appear. Oh, there was a time when your game board was a small theme park of courthouse, Victorian homes, and workers' cottages, veneer mills, gardens, churches, a hardware store, and knit shop, children on bicycles, a Carnegie library, perhaps even an archive of local history, and a restaurant where old men and farmers gathered in the winter over thick white mugs of coffee. And at the end of the game board, grain elevators filled with seed and the flatness of green fields that sounded and looked like the ocean when the wind blew across them. The sunset was as crimson on the western horizon as it was on the Gulf of Mexico. I'm here to tell you that the sunset is still as beautiful, but I know the game will keep you turned toward the center of the board. So first, choose and clean your sight. With practice, you will become skilled at judging the direction and width of your chosen vein. Use gravity to bring blood to your limb before applying your tourniquet. Swing or hang your arms, for instance, make a fist. Try to secure rolling veins so they won't roll. The method of securing rolling veins varies from person to person, and you will soon become proficient with practice. Be sure not to leave the tourniquet on too long. As the blood's tubing rises to the surface of your arm, it's tempting to stop and watch and waver. Do not do this. Make a choice. Make sure the needle bevel is opening face up. Remember, the goal is to quickly get the liquid to the heart. The needle should be perpendicular to the injection site. I cannot overstate this. You must have confidence when you make the insertion. Think about the times you've had blood drawn, how the skilled phlebotomist dives into the vein like an Olympian. Be that Olympian, and whatever you do, do not be cautious as you insert the needle through your skin and muscle, probing for the vein's tubing. This will cause the vein to roll and you might try again. So insert, just do the stick. When you think you're on a vein, pull the plunger back to see if the blood swirls into the syringe. If the blood is dark red and slow, then in fact you've hit a vein. At this point, untie your tourniquet and inject. If you did not hit a vein despite following these directions, or if your arm turns numb or you notice it turning blue, untie your tourniquet, pull your needle out, and wait before you try again. Gather your courage. You might try several times at first. If you're not properly positioned when you push the plunger, you'll be putting your drugs into the tissue surrounding the vein, or under the skin, or some mysterious black hole, dark matter. In addition, the tissue will be painful and will swell, and the effect of the drugs will come too slowly, and again, you might risk another dose. And you risk an abscess, so be patient, find the vein. If you follow the rules, you will find immediate relief. You may feel as though you were one with God. Rest assured that it is not God you are at one with. Still, if you'd like, pray to your God, praise, gratitude, supplication, confession of sins. Each prayer would be appropriate. You need all the help you can get to make your way into, through, and back. The goal at the game at this point will seem to you to be metamorphosis, but listen to me. The real goal for you is to stay alive until I can find a way to save you. And so the rush begins. Don't forget the vein you've tapped. Carefully pull the needle out of the injection site at the angle it went in. Apply pressure to the site to stop the bleeding. Don't use alcohol pads on a fresh injection wound. On the choice of partners, you will simply recognize each other. In the winter, you and the others will cuddle in the only house in the neighborhood that currently has heat. Neighbors, your neighbors' children. Despite our best efforts, you came to the game at different times, and as you know, for different reasons. All the reasons go back to the fact that the game board has drastically changed. Know that it always does, though. War, drought, famine, illness, death, poverty. The game board changes underneath your feet. We did not want you to feel the pain of this. In your case, instead of the verdant grid you carry in your memory and that I carry in mine, outside the blanket-covered windows, the snow now covers shattered county roads, the abandoned mill, the abandoned casket factory, the abandoned storefronts, and now industrial farms that no longer require the tending of plants or animals, but of monstrous machinery. At night, the machines are lit with headlights, a man sitting in an air-conditioned cab, listening to talk radio. But do not stop to mourn the past. Remember, your mother worked 40 to 60 hours a week, and when she felt her soul emptying, she would go to church or drive up to the city or the outlet mall by the interstate, and you and I would buy resin ears made in China, silk flowers, a faux painting of wine bottles or coffee, a t-shirt in several colors, the softness of kittens, the thickness of tissue paper, made of recycled pop bottles to soothe your conscience and to take your attention away from the fact that in the wash, the t-shirts would develop tiny holes. We were assured that this is the trend, one which will require the purchase of several more t-shirts. But in the meantime, here is one with the tiny holes manufactured into the fabric from the start. Doesn't it look good? Is it not hip? Do you not want it? Are you not beautiful in it? Doesn't it soothe your soul? The purchase of these things was a drug itself, and at night you would look at the glittering colors of objects, and for a while it would satisfy you until once again you felt yourself emptying and you would begin again. So what has changed? In all the years you learned nothing from me other than the syringe that sucks in money and then releases it. So when the money comes from disability checks or from your discharge from the service or from selling your body at the store, convenience store, and you need desperately to play the game because it has become, as you can see, the only game, then what are you to do? How could it be otherwise? Listen, dear one, if you want to play, you must understand you've made a choice you will regret. Every day in the world, you will tell yourself this is the last time you will succumb. The last dessert before the diet, the last purchase on a credit card, the last time you will sleep with him, the last lie you will tell, the last theft you will be forced to make, the last drink, the last injection, the last time, the very last. And every morning you will wake in shame. And the only thing that will ease the shame is more of the thing that caused it. I know this. I wish I had a well of wisdom to give you. I wish I had it now. You are so fragile. I loved you beyond reason. I wish I could have kept you in a sort of womb filled with beauty and light and angels. Sometimes I'm sorry I brought you to this world.
Wow. Thank you for letting us in. I know
Thanks.
we have teachers here, we have professors here, and as a professor, I always find the most difficult to teach my students. You can't teach this, is to let people in and to not keep them at arm's length. And it made me think of Dante's Inferno when listening to the description of the needle, and it was the nuances, the detail, it just sucks me in, no pun intended. But it was just reminds me of that scene in Dante's Inferno when Virgil was guiding Dante past Dis's hips that are entrapped in a lake of ice.
Yeah.
And when they cross the hip, everything is inverted.
And then they come out.
They
right?
come out the other end. Yeah, you see these two legs shooting up like towers.
Yeah.
It was the only book that I was reading. I was like,
You feel like you need to turn it.
it changed my orientation on, and that listening to you, you changed my orientation, and that was, thank you. Really appreciate it.
There are funny stories in the book.
Yeah, well, you have to, they usually come in pairs, right? The terror and the humor and
Right.
I've found that it naturally comes out that way. It takes no effort to pair humor and tragedy, because you need a comic relief, and that's what we usually do, is when something is so intense and so emotional, that we usually need some sort of something that lighten us up really quickly. But The Descent, I love it. I love The Descent. All your writings are just so amazing. You all let us in. Thank you. And intensely personal. And Kiik, you're writing about your family and the internment camps in this country, right? Caryl, you're writing about the not too distant past, as if it is ancient. And it made me feel that, you made me think of how everything we're taking for granted now, contemporarily, will easily be ancient. So thank you for taking such time and consideration, and handling your works of art like really fine, rare birds. Very handcrafted, very delicately handcrafted, with great attention. That's the skill. And I'm just grateful to be able to speak with you all, because let's just face it, experimental writers, I put up on Facebook, man, we're like Wolverines. We rarely meet, and when we do, though, is for creation,
And
so.
somebody picks up your book and thinks, "Oh my God, an experimental book. I think I'm not going to enjoy it." But
Yeah. I was like, yeah. It's like the no. Don't say it's experimental. It's literature.
Right.
I don't really believe in the term. Really, it's literature. We're just writing literature, but I know how we must market everything. Kiik and Caryl, you can unmute. So I'd love to hear your voices. We are going to open everything up for Q&A. So we're going to do this through chat, and everyone's sending all this love. You see all that love in the chat? Bathe in it. All that beautiful divine love. So send some questions in, and I believe you can unmute yourself, or maybe I'll need to unmute you. So just send me some questions, and I'll unmute you, and you can ask it yourselves. All right, so while we're waiting for questions, going back to you, Kiik, I wanted to ask you something about, because I was in California, and that's when I first heard about the concentration camps. And I was like, really? And I wanted to know, when I was out there, did you get a chance to go to other to research other concentration camps other than Arizona? Because I didn't know there was just Arizona too. I was just thinking California concentration camps. I thought they were deporting everyone from everywhere else in the country to California. So that is not correct.
Yeah. I was focused on the West Coast, where getting moved towards Arkansas and Wyoming and Gila. I didn't get to see very many of them. What stands today, I think, are mostly like memorials and things like that. And
where are they?
I think they're all over. I think they're on the historical sites, actually. So I know that there was some money when reparations were paid to the folks who were relocated and detained. I know that there was also federal money put aside to sort of to make those sites, into like sort of historical sites, and so that people could visit. But I haven't been to them, actually. I've only been to the Japanese American Museum in Los Angeles, which sort of houses, houses barracks, from, I think they house barracks from Gila, but I can't remember. It's been a long time since I've even seen those. A lot of it just lives sort of in my imagination and from my grandparents' stories.
And is both your parents were?
Yeah, it was both my grandparents on both sides, and all my family.
Okay.
Yeah, all my family of that generation, basically anyone born before 1942. So so my grandparents were like in their teenage years, I think, at the time, and then my aunt was born there.
I really appreciate the artwork that you showed of the propaganda, because it reminds me of a lot of propaganda against African Americans during the 1900s, and the movie Birth of a Nation that came out, and it just helped me, because we usually associate just to African Americans, but there are other people of color who were the Native Americans and the Japanese Americans. Anybody who's considered a threat in any period in American history, you need to demoralize them first before you kill them, or first you need to have some propaganda. You need to get the population to not look at them as human, then ship them out. It's pretty much what they did to the Jews. There's a step towards extermination procedures that you need to follow to do that. So disturbing, very disturbing. And Dr. Seuss, man, no, really? Oh well, I didn't like him anyway. But wow, that really, that doesn't really surprise me though. We have some questions.
Can you hear me?
Who's that speaking?
This is me, Michael. Kiik, if you're
Hey.
interested, there's the internment camp at Delta, Utah. Actually, was the site was purchased by a historical society and is preserved there. I mean, I love the idea that it's that this lives mostly in your imagination. But there's also there's a museum in town in Delta that has sort of like, put on several different exhibitions having to do with the camp there. And there were a number of artists that had been deported from the Bay Area. And so there was a whole sort of art school there. So actually, right when that museum opened, there was an exhibition of Chiyoda Abata's work and several of the other artists and their students there. It was really, really incredible. I mean, the ways in which they were able to sort of reproduce Japanese style prints using linoleum that, from the camp, as well as sort of creating these kind of incredible inkstones from shale that had trilobites, sort of, the imprints of trilobites in them. So anyway, just kind of a potentially an interesting stop for you at some point. And we'd love to have you out of Utah, so as well. So if you come this way, let us know.
Thank you for that. We'll visit it together, hopefully. And I would like to visit some of the historical sites. And thank you.
We have a question from Miss Hillary Plum. Hello. I'm going to unmute you. Don't worry. Okay, can't. All right, there you go. It's like everyone has a muzzle on them. I'm sorry. I hate to do that. I'm Sagittarian. It goes against my grain. You have a question for us?
I had a question. Well, I just saw that Joanna and I asked like two halves of the same or different questions, but I guess my question was thinking about that word experimental and wondering, I'm just always so curious about those of us who end up gathered under that label experimental, about how you all think about that word and how the word experimental has been useful to you, or if there are like moments or modes where you felt experimental.
Did everyone understand? Caryl, Kiik, you got to mute.
Well, Caryl and Susan will answer this more intelligently. So let me start. I think for me, what I thought I had started when I started the project a really long time ago, when I was maybe a dozen years ago, I thought I was working on something not experimental, something that actually was very like pop, hopefully like very pop, and sort of like I didn't know if it was like a YA audience. I thought I might be writing for high school students. And I couldn't make it work. I couldn't make it work as straight realist historical fiction. And so I think for me, you know, I don't know if I ever said this is going to be an experimental work, but I just felt like I had a different kind of, permission. I mean, I think that word can kind of sometimes give you a different kind of permission to do anything you want in form and in content. And at least it worked that way for me. So I remember thinking about myself as a high school student being not a good reader, being someone who reads like the first page of the story and then, looks at the rest of it on Cliff's Notes or something. And so I was thinking how I would have tried to reach myself as like a 17 or 18-year-old would have been to just write a one-page story. And then I was thinking, well, maybe I'll just try to write like a one-sentence story. Like, can there be a one-sentence story about the internment camps? Can there be like a 10-word story? Like I was trying to like really like find the limitations. And so I think for me, like, I don't know if I ever called it experimental, but I definitely felt like I just had a different permission at some stage with this work, that I was trying to be, I was just going to try a whole bunch of things in terms of form, and the content would stay kind of locked in, but formally I just felt very, very free.
I don't think I've ever thought of myself as experimental, really, or used that word. But there's kind of, I've always felt pretty free to just kind of try whatever I wanted to try. So particularly, I noticed the question is what's fiction? How do you label fiction? And I've always written nonfiction and fiction, and sometimes it's very hard to tell the difference between them, because I'll write stories that are like a first person narrator writing an essay, and use material from research, having written something for an essay and then used it in a story. So I do find like genre blurring has always just come easily to me, because I guess I've never been good at following rules, or feel kind of invisible or something. So it really didn't matter. Yeah, so my story collections always have what you probably could call a prose poem in them, or an essay. That's just almost always been the case. So I guess the word experimental is all I'm saying, isn't something that I've ever said, oh, I'm experimental. But it was fun to
Not exactly
think about
conscious
for
of
a
it.
second or two when Mark mentioned it.
So you're an experimental writer? I guess.
I found my tribe, my people.
Whatever. Oh, Caryl.
Yeah, I guess what I would have to say to the idea of being experimental is that I come to this all from a poetry background, which just like simply means that when I first started to write prose, these weird essay-ish things, that I was merely trying to write sentences, probably with some of the same aesthetic qualities that I think about or associate with my poetry. So just, working on the sentence level. But I guess if I think about it, what probably happened is I ended up writing prose in the same, room that all of my favorite writers write in, who are all what we would maybe call experimental or hybrid or, cross-genre or multi-genre writers. So I'm thinking of Sebald, who was mentioned before, or Wolf, or Renata Adler, or Renee Gladman, or Claudia Rankin, off the top of my head, some of the people who I've read over and over and over. And so they certainly must have had some influence, I think. But I like what both Kiik and Susan were saying about this idea of permission or being part of something, because now that I've kind of like stumbled into this room with you all once, I feel like if I ever try this thing again, writing another book of prose, that it's opened up a lot of possibilities. Like I like being in this experimental club, and now I'm like wondering how to push limits. Now that I know how to do like the bare minimum, you know, what comes next, I feel inspired to be a little more wild.
We should hang out more. We don't have to be Wolverines, you know, living solitary lives, eating bones. But yeah, it you know, experimental. I think what we do is just literature. It's just literature, you know, and I understand the need to have categories, but literature inherently is experimental. It's pushing the English language, it's pushing any language, it's pushing boundaries. So once you stop doing that, it ceases to be art and becomes craft. So yeah, whatever help, you know, whether sells, you know, some people like that word experimental. Some people are like shun it, you know, and like, but yeah, it's interesting concept. All right, we have, I guess that was also Johanna, you had a question? Joanna? The
Yeah,
hair?
I mean, I they
Does your hair have a question?
my hair is picking up signals from other planets. It'll be beaming in questions.
It is righteous, man, I tell you.
Thanks to all of you for your readings, and also for the really beautiful answers that that you've been giving. And I think my question is, you know, tied to Hillary's question, another one of these questions about definitions and terms. And the Fiction Collective, and then Fiction Collective 2, has been dedicated for decades to publishing adventurous, non-traditional fiction. And we have that, like, there we land on fiction. But I don't think anyone's intention is to fix what fiction is, but maybe even to like free fiction up more. And like listening to all of you and knowing your work across different genres, I think of all you do to keep like the idea of fiction itself traveling. Whether solitarily like a Wolverine, or like traveling in packs and traveling along certain non-traditional traditional pathways. So I guess I'm just curious, like, what do you think are some of the affordances of fiction, or like what calls you to fiction when you feel like that's what you're writing, or do you think that way at all? Is that something? I mean, Kiik, you're talking about oral histories and real stories in your family, but you're also mixing in talking crickets and like dreams and how you know, the context of, you know, in Indiana and that political history comes in, or even how Caryl, in your work, the way a subjectivity kind of moves through and narrates, and how that orders the world, and that's a version of things. So I'm just kind of curious how you all think about it.
I think it's a way of getting at whatever's most mysterious to you, and about the subject, or the initial, you know, whatever it was that gave you the idea for the piece. Because I'm almost always, I don't know if this answers your question or not, but I'm almost always working on fiction and nonfiction at the same time, like same screen. And I'll start a story and it'll end up turning to nonfiction and vice versa. And usually it's because there's just some mystery that I just cannot get to if I stay in, you know, where if the I has to be a version of me, or if I can't, you know, pull other things together into it. But I don't know, I do a lot of research for fiction as well. So anyway.
Kiik?
Yeah, I guess I'll just briefly say that I love this question, and I feel very much like I'm still thinking about it, especially having published something that, you know, I consider to be nonfiction with a fiction press, although those distinctions feel, you know, very blurry. And I think that the feeling of it for me is that I really, I feel drawn to the form of the essay and what it can do and all of its constraints and its various tensions and the history of the essay. And yet, when I look down, when I reread the essay I've written, you know, it's not true or something like that, you know, it's certainly not all true. And so I don't know what that is, like a form of nonfiction and a content that ends up inevitably leading into sort of like mysterious nooks and crannies that like wouldn't hold up in a strictly sort of journalistic sense of what truth is. And I wouldn't want to go back and change those things probably, because they're part of usually part of the music or the sentence structure or the syntax of it. So it gets all wrapped up in like moments of craft, I guess, too.
You know what? I really like what you said about the blurriness of it too, and it all basically finally being sentences. And the thing that's great about FC2 as compared to a more commercial press is that how can you explain that to a commercial press? It's the sentences. I really love
yeah.
you know, I'm doing all this kind of blurry is something. I'm not really quite sure where in the bookstore you should put it. You can't. So there always have had to be, I think.
It almost feels like when someone asks you.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. You just got me to thinking. It made me think when someone asked me to describe my story and everything. I'm like, and I know they're not really interested, you know. And it's just like, hey, I'm willing to die for this, man. And you're like facetiously asking me this question, and I just feel like I feel in the attempt to explain myself. I just feel foolish. And I remember what one of my mentors, Christina Garcia, said to me in the MFA program at Mills College. She said, well, resist the temptation to explain. Because for certain minority groups, we always feel a need or a compulsion to explain something that should be left for the reader to explore. And I just, it's a weird thing to try to explain the major publishing press. I'm not gonna go there. I'm gonna keep it positive and just say, at least FC2 keeps you in print, which is like, yes. No matter how poorly it sells for now, it will stand the test of time. So, and that's more important to me than anything. So, are we trying to make money or history? You could do both, but if you had to choose, you know. We have one question here, two questions from Curtis. So I want to unmute you, Curtis, and you could ask it yourself. Okay, can I do that? All right. Hi,
I didn't actually ask a question.
Oh, okay. I saw your name here.
It was, I just made a comment about how strange it seems that actually I've been having this conversation about the experimental for about 50 years. And it has always seemed to me to be a very strange thing to be, it's actually a way of isolating us and making us more vulnerable, making it easier to dismiss us. And the thing that seems odd to me is that we're asked to explain how we are or aren't experimental when the traditions that we're a part of, a living part of, go back to the Middle Ages and writers like Rabelais and Boccaccio and Dante, as you were discussing earlier. So I would like this to go away, the whole conversation about experimental or not experimental, but I guess it's not ever going to go away.
Just literature, right? Just literature.
Yeah.
Just literature.
It's freedom, really. It's like, how do you, it's just, go all BG on you and say it's staying alive.
Yeah, yeah. It's it is really, it truly is the freedom to have your artistic integrity intact. They could give you a multi-million-dollar book deal, but about time they finish with your drafts and revisions, it doesn't look like you wrote it anymore. And I just couldn't compromise that. So yeah, I wish it would go away too. It's just literature. So Brian Kahn, you have a question for us. So I'm going to unmute you. First, I have to find you. And it's there you are, Brian. There you go.
He says he doesn't have a mic.
Oh, okay. Okay. So I'll ask it for you. No mic. All right. Brian asks, is conventional fiction actually a historical experiment? Hmm. Is conventional fiction actually a historical experiment?
I'd say yes. I mean, isn't fiction when it, it's if it's good, it's different, and it's a voice you haven't heard. It's always fiction itself is an experiment. I would say if we're thinking of novels as conventional fiction or short stories, and not of just talent folk or narrative. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm fully understanding the question, but yeah, I mean, I also don't exactly know how to define conventional fiction. It makes me think of, I don't know, like Raymond Carver, or John Cheever, as like Raymond Carver, or John Cheever, conventional fiction. And maybe like in some ways, like they are, they teleport you to a time historically, like more accurately, but I don't even know if that's true. I don't know, but I like the question. I'll have to keep thinking about it.
I've got a mic, so I can say more about the question.
Brian,
my thinking was just that, if we think about the entire history of fiction, of like making things up for, I don't know, entertainment or stories or like that, it seems like the moment we're in now, where we have this kind of very well-defined market for a certain kind of story, that's actually pretty unusual. Like we haven't had that for most of the history of fiction. And so instead of thinking of ourselves as experimental, I'm playing off of what Curtis said, like we're actually doing the same thing that fiction has always done. And in the context of history, the experimental part is that there's this weird market where people make these kind of formulaic stories all the time, right? That's the experiment. Does that make any sense?
Folks, I kind of get it. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Someone say something.
I'm sorry. I feel like I'm talking too much. I was thinking about Bernadine Evaristo's Girl, Woman, Other as a kind of very, you might call it a very experimental. It begins and it's like there are no lines, it's poetry, it's but it won the Booker Prize. It's I don't know. I think that maybe there should be more writers kind of pushing at boundaries and not thinking that
please.
That it's
Please.
experimental or different. That's just kind of getting things.
I could pick up any one of these books that it's just they're just so different, and I really mean that you can't imitate them. And I go to a regular major bookstore and it's the same old formula being rehashed and rehashed. I was like, man, my eyelids are melting. It was just not really engaging. But when I pick up these so-called experimental books, I just feel it just renews my faith that there are writers who are pushing boundaries, and the art is still growing, particularly in the age of technology where the attention span is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And pretty soon people will have the attention span of a goldfish. But it really becomes a challenge because of just speaking with my students at the University of Penn. it was just difficult for me to understand how, well, it was difficult for them to read certain books that I was assigning because it requires silence in a way, and they're not used to silence. They're used to filling it up or rushing away from it. And it's just becoming a really, the books that I love will be, I can't see them being published today. I can't see Tropic of Cancer being published today, or Moby Dick, right? That it would be too long, too meandering. Yeah, it just, these classics that we praise and laud, they wouldn't be published by the big presses today, or even by some of the little big presses. And you constantly find that, I constantly find myself like trying to find something innovative and original, and I love small presses for doing that, because without the small press, I truly believe that we are the writers' writers. And you need both writers who write for readers and writers who write for writers. And you are the writer, you're writing the book you want to read. And it's very important to have both, because each hand washes the other. So the commercial writer brings an audience for us, but at the same time, we push the so-called experimental writer. We push boundaries, not because we want to, it's because we are that. I don't feel experimental, but just you're dying. You have something to say, and oftentimes listen to your stories, Caryl, Susan, and Kiik. Your stories. Listen to your stories. To tell them any other way, to tell them in a formulaic way, would already do it a disservice, wouldn't be your voice anymore. Certain stories require an innovation to be attempted. That's part of the story. That's part of the voice that is inhabiting the writer at the time. It requires for you to try a different form and to experiment with form for the voice to come across effectively. So I just went off on there. I'm sorry. It's so rare that I get to speak to everybody about writing and all these other Wolverines. Oh, so do we have one more? Anything else? I think that's it. And just, I hope this chat scroll stays up, because all that love is really nice. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time out of your day and coming to hear our voices and spending some time with us. It is a rare meeting, and we should do this more. Thank you, Kiik Araki-Kawaguchi. Did I say that correctly? Caryl Pagel, as in bagel. And Susan Neville. Blessings so much. Thank you all for joining us. And please keep us in mind for our future virtual FC2 readings. We will have another one towards the end of November. And once again, please make sure, if you are interested in submitting to the Ronald Sukanik or the Catherine Doctoral contest, you have until November the 1st, which is it Saturday, Sunday? Okay.
15th.
The 15th? Okay, yeah. I saw on the website it was 1st. Okay, 15th.
Polish that thing up.
All right. I was just trying to get them,
get people motivated.
Yeah, I didn't want to get all that backlog around the 15th. And so I was trying to push it up a little bit more. So, well, thank you all so much. And
thank you, Mark, for hosting us.
It was my pleasure. It was definitely my pleasure. And enjoy your weekend. Enjoy your Halloween tomorrow. And go vote. Blessings.